41 minutes of engineered darkness is all it takes to erase a human life. In cases where a 41-minute digital gap hides an abduction, the true narrative of what happened during those 41 minutes of digital darkness was not written in the living room. It was written on the cold pavement outside. The transition from the pristine indoor environment to the reality of the exterior scene forces a complete reevaluation of the events. The perpetrator was careful, but they were not flawless. The physical world eventually demands a toll, even from the most calculated criminals. The immaculate scene inside ends at the doorway, giving way to the stark, undeniable proof that an atrocity occurred while the cameras were blind. The pristine illusion of the interior shatters upon inspecting the front porch. Investigators discovered a distinct pattern of blood staining the concrete surface. Forensic analysis quickly confirmed that the DNA profile extracted from the blood belonged entirely to Nancy Guthrie. This physical reality grounds the abstract terror of the digital blackout into a visceral act of violence. Every detail matters. Subscribe to Ellis Case Reports as we continue to track the exact evidence and system failures behind unsolved investigations. Blood on the porch means she was outside. It means she was injured. It means the 41 minutes of darkness contained a physical confrontation that the neutralized cameras were deliberately prevented from seeing. The timeline reconstructed from the digital logs provides a chilling framework for this bloodletting. At 1:47 in the morning, the primary security camera was disabled. This was the first move. 25 minutes of unrecorded silence followed. Then, at 2:12 in the morning, the internal system logs registered a motion event. Something or someone moved through the monitored zone. Yet, because the system had been fundamentally compromised, no video data was captured or stored. This logged motion event is the ghost of the perpetrator moving through the blind spot they created. 16 minutes after this phantom movement, the final digital thread was cut. We are looking at a precise timeline of silence. At 2:28 in the morning, the medical application monitoring the pacemaker lost all connection. This sequence is a master class in forensic evasion. The perpetrator blinded the system, executed the physical abduction, and then severed the medical health monitor of the victim. This is the timeline break. The blood on the concrete is the only physical testament to what happened during the gap between the disabled camera and the silenced heart monitor. The gap represents a horrifying window of opportunity where a predator operated with complete impunity. They controlled the environment. They controlled the flow of information. They ensured that the violence on the porch remained a secret, shared only between the attacker and the victim. The presence of the blood confirms that the immaculate interior was not a sign of a peaceful exit, but rather a boundary the violence did not cross. The struggle happened outside, in the cold, under the cover of a forced digital blackout. The calculation required to execute this sequence elevates the threat level astronomically. The perpetrator knew exactly how to dismantle a modern security system piece by piece. This was not a crime of passion or a burglary gone wrong. The perpetrator demonstrated an intimate understanding of surveillance technology and medical telemetry. They knew exactly which signals to jam and which wires to cut. The blood on the porch is the brutal signature of a ghost. It forces us to ask a terrifying question. Who possesses the technical sophistication to hack a secure home network and the cold brutality to abduct an 84-year-old woman in the dead of night? The intersection of high-level cyber intrusion and physical violence is incredibly rare. It suggests a highly specialized offender. Yet, as this forensic blueprint emerges, highlighting a sophisticated and dangerous suspect, the expected federal response is missing. A crime crossing digital boundaries and involving complex electronic sabotage usually triggers an immediate escalation to specialized federal units. But the federal weight is absent. The local authorities are standing on a porch stained with blood, holding the digital logs of a sophisticated cyber attack, and the narrative begins to twist. They knew the blind spots. They knew the network architecture. The shocking technical prowess of the perpetrator is about to collide with a completely different kind of obstacle. The forensic evidence demands an elite analytical response, but the system designed to provide that response is about to fail spectacularly. The blood and the digital logs are waiting to be processed. If you want to understand how a perfect crime scene is dismantled by bureaucracy, hit the subscribe button for Ellis Case Reports. The investigation immediately plunged into an abyss of public noise and institutional friction. The complete lack of visual evidence and the shocking nature of the crime created a vacuum of information. Nature abhors a vacuum. And in the modern true crime ecosystem, that void is instantly filled with digital static. Shortly after the disappearance, the media landscape was hijacked by an anonymous entity. An unknown individual sent a direct communication to the entertainment news outlet TMZ. This sender claimed to possess critical eyewitness information regarding the victim. They moved through the shadows with the confidence of someone who had practiced this routine. They boldly asserted they had seen Nancy alive in Mexico and demanded a ransom of 1 Bitcoin in exchange for her exact coordinates. This anonymous claim exploded across social media platforms, derailing public focus and muddying the waters of the legitimate investigation. However, professional analysis quickly cut through the deception. Former FBI agent Jason Pack publicly dismantled the ransom note. He categorized the communication as a classic imposter scheme. It was a predatory tactic utilized by opportunists seeking to exploit the chaos of a high-profile missing persons case for financial gain. The claim was entirely fraudulent, a piece of digital trash designed to distract and extort. The authorities definitively ruled out the Mexico sighting, classifying it as a complete fabrication. Stripping away the fraudulent noise of the Bitcoin demand leaves investigators with a painfully thin file of physical evidence. Beyond the blood on the porch, the landscape was barren. The target was not a high-profile politician or a corporate executive, but an exhaustive search grid radiating outward from the crime scene eventually yielded a single critical artifact. Search teams located an isolated glove resting on the ground approximately 2 miles away from the residence of the victim. This discovery fundamentally shifted the trajectory of the case. A glove found in the proximity of a meticulous abduction is not just a piece of fabric. It is a potential gold mine of biological material. It is a vessel that could harbor the sweat, the skin cells, or the DNA of the ghost who orchestrated the 41 minutes of darkness. The geographical location of the glove 2 miles out suggests a disposal point along an escape route. It marks the physical path the abductor took after leaving the bloodstained porch. In forensic science, an item like this requires the most advanced, sensitive, analytical techniques available. The potential for touch DNA or microscopic trace evidence means the glove must be handled and processed with extreme caution. The target was an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie. The standard protocol for a piece of evidence carrying this magnitude of importance, especially in a case demonstrating high-level technical sophistication, is rapid escalation. The United States possesses the most advanced forensic laboratories in the world, specifically designed to extract impossible answers from minute traces of evidence. The FBI maintains quantum-level laboratory facilities in Virginia equipped to handle exactly this type of critical artifact. These federal labs possess proprietary technology and vast databases capable of matching microscopic fragments to known offenders. The logical, expected step was the immediate transfer of the glove to federal custody for elite analysis. This piece of evidence represented the singular hope of unmasking the sophisticated perpetrator who bypassed the digital fortress. The investigation hinged entirely on the biological secrets woven into the fabric of that glove. The local authorities had a clear path forward. They held the key to breaking the case wide open. But the transition of evidence from the dusty ground 2 miles from the house to the sterile, she was asleep in her own bed, surrounded by technology that was supposed to keep her safe. Environment of a laboratory was about to become the epicenter of a massive institutional failure. The evidence was secured, but the decisions that followed would dictate whether the truth would be uncovered or buried forever. The technical brilliance of the attacker was no longer the only obstacle preventing justice. A new barrier was emerging, constructed not from digital code or physical violence, but from human ego and jurisdictional boundaries. The investigation was moving away from the cold logic of the crime scene and entering the unpredictable arena of local politics and departmental pride. Compounding this friction, airborne search resources were allegedly diverted away from the search grid to perform routine patrol tasks during the most critical hours of the disappearance. The machinery of justice is often idealized as a seamless network of cooperating agencies, yet the reality on the ground is frequently fractured by invisible boundary lines. When the jurisdiction falls strictly under local purview, the commanding officer possesses absolute authority over the direction of the inquiry. In this specific district, that authority rested entirely with Sheriff Chris Nanos. The initial response to a potential kidnapping is universally recognized as the golden window, a fleeting period where immediate, aggressive action can dictate the entire outcome. Instead, that same technology was weaponized to hide her disappearance. However, reports strongly allege that the personnel dispatched to the property during those crucial early hours critically lacked the necessary tenure and specialized training required for a complex extraction scenario. A scene demanding the precision of seasoned forensic analysts was instead navigated by individuals unaccustomed to the highly specific nuances of such sophisticated offenses. The severe friction between the intense demands of the crime and the limited capabilities of the initial responders created a widening, dangerous chasm. Every passing hour allowed the perpetrator to safely increase their distance, exponentially compounding the tragedy of the rapidly unfolding situation. The most egregious administrative decision, however, centered around the handling of the primary physical artifact recovered from the roadside grid. That single item held the absolute potential to unlock the true identity of the assailant. As established, elite resources were standing by, offering immediate access to unparalleled analytical capabilities and comprehensive national databases. Relinquishing the item to outside scientists would mean publicly acknowledging the limitations of the local department, a concession that often clashes violently with institutional law enforcement pride. The lead official made a defining, controversial executive choice. He explicitly bypassed the established intelligence network. At 1:47 in the morning, a digital eye abruptly goes blind. The methodical nature of these disconnections points to a chilling reality. He officially declined to utilize the highly advanced government facilities practically designed for such high-stakes matters. Instead, the local administration packaged the sole piece of biological hope and shipped it across the country to a completely separate commercial testing facility located specifically in Florida. This singular decision effectively commodified the entire investigation. It transferred the heavy burden of scientific discovery from a specialized intelligence apparatus directly to a private enterprise operating strictly on municipal financial contracts. The official justification for completely bypassing the standard route remains a point of intense, ongoing public scrutiny. Commercial laboratories, while highly competent in standard diagnostic procedures, operate under vastly different operational protocols and critically lack the immediate, seamlessly integrated access to classified national registries that government entities routinely utilize. By deliberately choosing the commercial route, the local agency successfully retained absolute administrative control over the physical evidence, but they simultaneously severed the direct, vital pipeline to the most powerful investigative engine in the country. The localized approach successfully insulated the department from external oversight, but it tragically also isolated them from critical, high-level support. The person who stood outside her door was not acting on impulse. This administrative firewall effectively transformed a unified pursuit of justice into a disjointed, highly proprietary effort. The stubborn insistence on maintaining strict territorial control over the investigation began to visibly overshadow the primary objective of actually locating the missing person. The procedural maneuvers practically demonstrated a highly disturbing hierarchy where municipal autonomy was seemingly prioritized above leveraging every conceivable technological advantage to solve the crime. The tension in the public sphere shifted from the terrifying unknown of the perpetrator to the agonizing reality of bureaucratic friction. The surviving family, the local community, and the concerned public were left waiting in a massive informational void, placing their collective, desperate faith in a simple parcel traveling to a private business in Florida. The profound complexity of the initial residential breach was now completely, hopelessly entangled in a dense web of administrative stubbornness. As quiet days slowly bled into silent weeks, the lack of communication from the command center grew increasingly deafening. Subscribe to Ellis Case Reports to comprehensively understand how internal departmental policies can irrevocably alter the fundamental course of justice. The heavy anticipation for the commercial laboratory results, became a suffocating psychological weight on absolutely everyone involved. They were executing a meticulously designed plan. They brought darkness with them. All external observers clearly understood that the Florida facility held the final, incredibly fragile thread connecting the desperate investigators to the phantom who vanished into the dark. The entire reliance on this single commercial endeavor was a monumental, unprecedented gamble of public trust. If the private laboratory failed to successfully extract a viable genetic profile, or if their localized databases yielded no immediate matches, the entire inquiry would inevitably hit an impenetrable solid wall. The controversial departmental decision to reject outside assistance was about to be officially put to the ultimate scientific test. The devastating consequences of that specific choice would either definitively validate the localized strategy or brutally expose a catastrophic systemic error in official judgment. The eventual return of the scientific report from the Florida facility marked the undeniable climax of this institutional failure. When the private analysts finally completed their extraction protocols on the recovered fabric, they successfully isolated a genetic signature. They possessed the biological barcode of the individual who had handled that item. The next procedural step is universally standard, running that extracted sequence against the combined DNA index system, the massive federal repository of known offenders. They isolated their victim from the digital world before they ever crossed the physical threshold. This is the moment where scientific precision is supposed to deliver absolute clarity. The data was inputted. The search algorithm scoured millions of stored records looking for a corresponding sequence. The system returned a completely negative result. There was no match. The unknown profile belonged to a ghost whose biological data had never been cataloged by the authorities. This revelation is the catastrophic turning point of the entire narrative. The negative result instantly exposed the fatal flaw in the localized command strategy. If the evidence had been submitted directly to the premier federal facilities, the outcome might have been identical, but the tools available to interpret that failure would have been vastly superior. Federal laboratories possess specialized units dedicated to advanced genetic genealogy, capable of tracing unknown profiles through distant familial lines. They utilize proprietary algorithms and expansive ancestral databases that commercial entities simply do not access with the same integrated speed. The complete blackout of the security perimeter and the medical monitoring application within 41 minutes requires technical knowledge and cold calculation. By restricting the evidence to a private, contract-based analysis, the local department deliberately handcuffed their own investigation. They obtained a genetic string, but they lacked the advanced secondary infrastructure required to decode it when the primary database failed them. The brilliance of the initial abduction strategy was horrifying, but the subsequent escape was ultimately facilitated by the very people sworn to pursue the truth. The perpetrator engineered a flawless extraction, slipping through the localized blind spots of a digital security system. But their continued freedom was virtually guaranteed by the bureaucratic vanity of the local jurisdiction. The two forces collided in a perfect storm of devastation. A highly capable criminal mind encountered a fragmented, prideful law enforcement apparatus, and the criminal emerged entirely victorious. The refusal to share jurisdiction transformed a difficult case into an unsolvable mystery. The negative database result from the commercial laboratory meant the trail was officially and definitively cold. The biological material that was supposed to serve as a roadmap to the suspect it demands an understanding of how interconnected devices communicate and, more importantly, how they fail. Now, nothing more than a useless string of meaningless letters on a printed page. The profound tragedy of this outcome is rooted in the realization that the system did not just fail to catch the offender. The system actively hindered its own capacity to do so. The protective shield of law enforcement was fractured not by the brilliance of the attacker, but by internal territorial disputes. The investigation became trapped in an echo chamber of its own making, unable to look beyond its own jurisdictional boundaries for the necessary salvation. The ghost who perpetrated the crime is still out there, entirely unburdened by the threat of discovery, shielded by the systemic inadequacies of a department that refused to ask for help. This is the ultimate betrayal of the victim and the community. The complex technical evasion at the residence demonstrated a calculated malice, but the administrative decisions that followed demonstrated an unforgivable negligence. The collision of these two realities creates an atmosphere of profound despair. The silent alarms and the unrecorded motion events create a forensic blueprint of a predator who understood exactly what they were doing. We are forced to witness a scenario where advanced forensic science is rendered completely impotent by administrative hubris. Subscribe to Ellis Case Reports as we continue to dissect these critical systemic breakdowns. The negative result is not merely a lack of information. It is a damning indictment of the procedural choices that led to it. The ghost profile remains suspended in the national database, a silent testament to a spectacular failure of collaborative justice. The window of opportunity to leverage elite federal resources closed the moment the package was mailed to Florida. The local authorities gambled the life of a citizen on their own pride, and they lost everything. The technological sophistication of the intruder was terrifying, but the bureaucratic paralysis that followed is infinitely more disturbing. It forces a terrifying realization upon the public. No matter how advanced our scientific capabilities become, they are entirely useless if the people in charge refuse to utilize them properly. The empty database result represents the absolute victory of institutional ego over empirical evidence. The 41 minutes between the first severed connection and the final silenced heartbeat monitor represent a flawless execution of terror. A terrifying victory that ensures the darkness surrounding this specific case will never truly lift. The perpetrator walked away completely clean, actively aided by the very institution specifically tasked with their immediate capture. The agonizing reality settling over this community is one of permanent uncertainty. Today, the victim remains completely missing without a single trace. The active, aggressive phases of the inquiry have gradually dissolved into a stagnant administrative routine. The vibrant, urgent energy that characterized the initial investigative days has been permanently replaced by clinical, melancholic silence. Law enforcement public briefings have become incredibly sparse, offering only carefully recycled statements about ongoing efforts that yield absolutely no tangible progress. The local department, heavily burdened by the severe consequences of their administrative isolation, appears to be simply waiting for a miraculous external development rather than actively driving the investigation forward. The physical landscape of the immediate neighborhood has slowly returned to its deceptive, quiet normalcy. The environment surrounding Nancy Guthrie was supposed to be a fortress of modern convenience and safety. The restrictive yellow boundary tape has long been removed from the disputed property line. The concrete exterior, where the violent physical truth was briefly exposed, has been thoroughly chemically cleaned, erasing the last visible biological scar of the event. Yet, the psychological atmosphere surrounding the empty residence is permanently altered forever. It stands today as a silent, monolithic monument to an unresolved catastrophe. The highly sophisticated electronic devices inside the home, once proudly intended to be vigilant guardians, remain powered down and entirely useless. They are now merely expensive artifacts of a fundamentally failed security philosophy. The surrounding community is forced to grapple with the terrifying knowledge that a human predator of profound technical capability operated successfully in their very midst and vanished completely without consequence. The lingering communal trauma is intensely exacerbated by the absolute, total lack of psychological closure. An officially confirmed tragedy, while undeniably devastating, at least allows for a structured grieving process to logically begin. Living alone at 84 years of age, she resided in a home heavily fortified by interconnected smart devices. But an unresolved, open-ended disappearance violently forces the surviving family and the concerned public to exist in a suspended, agonizing state of perpetual dread. The human mind constantly cycles through 1,000 impossible scenarios, desperately searching for a logical conclusion that the available physical evidence stubbornly refuses to reliably provide. The physical case files sit dormant in locked municipal cabinets, filled with wild, unverified tips and the completely useless genetic profile of a dangerous phantom. The stubborn institutional refusal to escalate the matter to federal intelligence units during the initial response has created an unbridgeable, fatal gap in the investigative timeline. The critical momentum permanently lost during those first few crucial weeks can never be successfully recovered by any laboratory. The localized command structure, having boldly gambled their reputation and failed spectacularly, is now left awkwardly presiding over a perpetually open, deeply embarrassing case. They proudly hold the jurisdictional keys to a profound mystery they have unequivocally proven themselves entirely incapable of solving. The broader public discourse surrounding the specific event has slowly faded from intense front-page national urgency to the quiet, obscure corners of unresolved case digital databases. The name of the missing victim is slowly, tragically, becoming a historical footnote rather than an active, burning rallying cry for immediate justice. However, just beneath the suspiciously quiet surface of the stalled investigation, a profound, unshakable unease remains deeply rooted in the local consciousness. A security camera designed to watch the front porch of a quiet home loses its connection to the outside world. This digital ecosystem was not just for convenience, it was a lifeline. The clinical, analytical breakdown of these specific chronological events reveals a highly disturbing truth about our modern, interconnected existence. We willingly surround ourselves with invisible layers of presumed digital safety, blindly trusting that consumer technology and local authority will automatically provide an impenetrable, flawless shield. This specific case ruthlessly shatters that comforting illusion completely and irreparably. It practically demonstrates that even the most advanced digital residential perimeter can be systematically, quietly neutralized by a sufficiently knowledgeable and determined adversary. Even more importantly, it aggressively exposes the chilling underlying reality that the ultimate societal safety net, the municipal law enforcement apparatus, can be rendered entirely ineffective by its own petty internal politics. The complete failure to secure a definitive resolution is not just an isolated tragedy for one specific family. It is a glaring, undeniable warning to modern society at large. As the silent months pass, without the identification of a single viable suspect, one terrifying unanswered question continues to consistently echo through the prolonged silence. If a highly coordinated, flawlessly executed extraction can occur seamlessly in a technologically fortified environment, and if the subsequent critical investigation can be so easily, thoroughly derailed by administrative law enforcement hubris, who among us is truly, actually safe? It was a comprehensive surveillance and health monitoring network meant to provide immediate alerts the second anything went wrong. The permanently unresolved nature of this specific disappearance simply leaves that horrifying question hanging heavily in the ambient air, serving as a constant, unforgiving reminder of our profound collective vulnerability. What this case critically teaches us about modern vulnerability extends far beyond a single missing persons report. From a purely analytical standpoint, it serves as a masterclass in the terrifying fragility of the Internet of Things. We increasingly delegate our personal security to automated applications and wireless sensory networks, assuming these digital ecosystems provide an active defense. The forensic reality, however, dictates that these systems are entirely passive. They are fundamentally incapable of intervention. Without a dedicated human actively monitoring the data stream in real time, a smart home is nothing more than a highly detailed, easily manipulated surveillance apparatus. The forensic evidence clearly demonstrated that digital signals are highly susceptible to targeted interference, proving that absolute reliance on wireless security architecture is a dangerous architectural flaw. Furthermore, what this case teaches us about systemic law enforcement functionality is deeply unsettling. We are forced to observe the catastrophic consequences that manifest when jurisdictional ego clashes with empirical evidence. Cameras watched the perimeter. Sensors monitored the doors. The localized refusal to integrate with superior federal intelligence assets highlights a systemic vulnerability within our decentralized justice structure. When municipal pride dictates the trajectory of crucial physical analysis, the integrity of the entire investigation is compromised. The failure here was not merely scientific, it was fundamentally organizational. The local authority prioritized maintaining administrative control over the artifact rather than securing the highest probability of identifying the perpetrator. This behavioral pattern reveals a critical structural flaw where internal agency politics can actively subvert the pursuit of objective truth. Ultimately, this paradigm ensures that when the localized system isolates itself from broader collaborative networks, the only individual Who truly benefits is the criminal. The analytical conclusion is clear. An integrated, ego-free approach is an absolute requirement, not an optional luxury, for navigating complex criminal behavior. The tragedy we are left analyzing today is defined by two distinct, equally devastating failures. On one side, an unknown orchestrator utilized a brief window of engineered technological blindness to execute a flawless, completely silent removal of a vulnerable human being. On the other side, the established institution sworn to protect society allowed the only viable path to the truth to be obstructed by an overwhelming display of administrative pride. A specialized medical application continuously tracked the rhythm of her pacemaker, broadcasting vital statistics to a paired mobile device. Between the highly calculated malice of the intruder and the stubborn bureaucratic vanity of the local agency, an individual simply vanished. The final verdict of this particular investigation is a chilling, undeniable testament to profound systemic dysfunction. It leaves the public to endlessly ponder a deeply unsettling hypothetical scenario regarding the proper administration of justice. If you were physically holding the single, irreplaceable piece of biological evidence containing the true genetic identity of a ruthless predator, who would you truly trust to decipher it? Would you willingly hand it to a commercial contractor to protect your municipal authority? Or would you surrender it to the most powerful federal laboratory on the planet? Subscribe to Ellis Case Reports to track the exact evidence and system failures behind unsolved investigations. This level of connectivity creates an illusion of absolute security. The assumption is that if danger approaches, the system will scream for help. The tension lies in the silent vulnerability of this digital armor. Every camera requires a stable network. Every health monitor depends on a continuous Bluetooth or Wi-Fi handshake. This modern fortress was entirely reliant on invisible waves of data that can be intercepted, jammed, or severed. Her daily routine was predictable and monitored. She was enveloped in a continuous stream of digital checkpoints. 25 minutes later, an unseen presence triggers a motion sensor in the dark, yet the system records absolutely nothing. Yet, this very system designed to protect her ultimately served only to document the precise timeline of its own destruction. The presence of such advanced technology in the home of an elderly woman living alone suggests a deep awareness of vulnerability. It indicates a family that wanted to ensure safety from afar, but a fortress is only as strong as its weakest digital link. The devices meant to be her guardians were fundamentally passive. They could record a tragedy, but they could not intervene. They were unblinking eyes and silent listeners, entirely dependent on an unbroken stream of electricity and data. When a sophisticated threat targets a system like this, the technology shifts from being a shield to becoming a liability. It creates a false sense of peace. The house was a quiet island of routine, isolated from the chaotic noise of the city, wrapped in a blanket of invisible frequencies. Everything was ordered. Everything was tracked. A digital void is captured where an intruder should be. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint glow of standby lights on the routers, the rhythmic transmission of a heartbeat through the airwaves. This was a life meticulously measured and protected by code, but code can be rewritten. Connections can be terminated. The unease settles in when you realize that whoever approached this house did not see a fortress. They saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. They saw a network of vulnerable nodes. They understood that to reach the woman inside, they did not need to break down a physical door right away. They first needed to dismantle the invisible walls protecting her. The complete reliance on these systems means that once they are compromised, the isolation is absolute. The victim is left entirely alone, cut off from the outside world while the machines around them continue their silent, useless functions. The digital guardians were systematically blinded and muted. Then, at 2:28 in the morning, the most chilling disconnection occurs. The house, initially a beacon of monitored safety, was transforming into a digital tomb. The silence that followed the severed connections was not the peace of a sleeping home. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a system that had been deliberately neutralized. The unblinking cameras were dead. The medical lifeline was cut. The unease is absolute because the technology did not fail. It was defeated. The physical events surrounding the disappearance are as baffling as the digital blackout. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, the family routine proceeded without any sign of impending danger. At 9:48 that night, her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home after a family dinner. He watched her walk to the door. This was the last verified sighting of the 84-year-old woman. The neighborhood was quiet. The night was unremarkable. A medical application tracking the beating heart of an elderly woman is severed from its network. 11 hours later, the illusion of normalcy shattered. At 11 in the morning on February 1st, Nancy failed to log into her scheduled online church service. This immediate deviation from her strict routine triggered alarms within her family. When authorities eventually breached the residence, they were met with an environment that defied all logic of a violent home invasion. According to News Nation, the interior of the house was reportedly immaculate. The forensic investigators stepping through the doorway found no shattered glass. They found no splintered wood around the door frames. There were no overturned chairs or scattered belongings to suggest a desperate struggle for survival. The atmosphere inside was frozen in mundane perfection. It was an environment completely devoid of the chaotic energy typically associated with an abduction. It does not send an alert. It does not trigger an alarm. A violent extraction of an individual usually leaves a chaotic wake. Furniture is displaced. Valuables are disturbed. Desperation leaves physical scars on the environment. Yet, this scene was pristine. The absence of destruction is terrifying because it implies control. It implies a perpetrator who moved through the physical space with the same calculated precision they used to dismantle the digital network. The immaculate nature of the interior forces investigators to confront impossible scenarios. Did the victim willingly open the door to her abductor in the middle of the night? Or did the intruder possess the means to bypass physical locks just as easily as they bypassed the digital security? The flawless state of the home stands in direct contradiction to the grim reality of a missing person. It is a physical void that mirrors the digital void of the severed cameras. The silence inside the house was deafening. Every pristine surface and undisturbed rug mocked the investigators, trying to understand how a human being could simply evaporate. It simply fades to black. This sequence of events does not describe a random burglary. It describes a surgical digital strike. The immaculate condition is a single source detail that, if accurate, changes the entire complexion of the investigation. It elevates the perpetrator from a desperate criminal to a methodical operator. They left no physical noise. They did not ransack the bedroom for valuables. Their singular focus was the extraction of the victim, and they achieved it without leaving a footprint of chaos inside the walls. But while the interior of the house guarded its secrets with pristine silence, the exterior painted a vastly different picture. The illusion of a peaceful departure evaporated the moment investigators focused their attention on the concrete steps just outside the front door. The contrast between the undisturbed living room and the harsh reality of the porch is jarring. Inside, there was no sign of a crime. Outside, the physical evidence of violence was waiting to be discovered under the glaring light of the desert sun. The immaculate interior was merely a facade. It was a carefully preserved stage set that ended abruptly at the threshold.